Hello everyone, welcome to the latest in our series of educational webinar. So today we'll be looking at challenges and solutions to address the DevOps data gap using data virtualization in cloud environments. So my name is Pascal. I lead the technology partnerships at Quali, and I'm joined today by Adam Bowen, strategic advisor at the Delphix office of the CTO. So if you're a director of lab operations, QA or dev test manager, cloud architect, security architect, or head of IT, or even a data center infrastructure, you'll get a lot out of this webinar. Some of you may be trying to figure out how to balance the needs for speed and security when it comes to deploying your application. And we hope that you can learn some valuable insight over the next hour. So let's go over the agenda. To start, after a brief intro on Quali and Delphix, we'll spend a bit of time talking about some of the DevOps challenge known as the data gap and providing you a few real-world examples in the industry. Then we'll discuss about how the combination of data virtualization and cloud sandboxes can address these challenges. Finally, we'll run through a demo of this integration and leave some time towards the end for Q&A. Now I want to remind folks that we'll be giving out 3 $50 Amazon gift cards at the end of the webinar. 3 of you who have joined and stayed through will be selected from the list of attendees and notified via emails that you've won. Also, for the Q&A at the end, just enter your questions in the question box. We have a panel of experts that will be present to answer, and we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end. We may also answer some via chat as well. Okay, so to start, I want to give just a brief introduction to Quali and who we are. So Quali is a venture-funded startup focused on cloud automation and orchestration. Our core technology is centered around the notion of cloud sandboxing, which allows creating replicas of production or otherwise complex environments delivered as a service for a variety of use cases. We have just over 300 customers worldwide, including major service providers, NEMs, and enterprise across healthcare, Fiserv, and government. Now I let Adam introduce Delphix.
Thanks, Pascal. So Delphix was a venture-funded startup. We started about 2008, and we're headquartered out of Redwood City. And Delphix focuses on a new concept called data virtualization, which we will get into here briefly in some description. But essentially, we radically improved the delivery of data for your databases, applications, and files, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, while also fully securing that data as well. And we find as a result, our customers, it drives a transformation in their delivery that gives them significantly improved outcomes by removing data as the next huge constraint or the risk in their environment. We have over 300 customers. We have 30% of the Fortune 100 customers, and we have them across all different verticals, whether it's cloud providers, managed service providers, telcos, banks, finance, and insurance as well as government. We have about 400 employees throughout the world, and we have a world-class organization virtualizing data for some of the biggest companies in the world as well. Thanks, Pascal. So if we think about the challenges for both financial and healthcare institutions, there's really 4 main challenges out there today. There's time to market pressures, so trying to get applications and new products to market before the next competitor. There's data security issues. Every day in the news we see somebody else has been hacked and data has been compromised and up for sale to the highest bidder. We have siloed legacy systems that are keeping you from moving fast, so whether it's old big Indian systems or just hard pieces of equipment on site, that it makes it hard for them to get into the digital revolution. And then heightened regulations. New regulations are formed every day, whether that's GDPR in Europe or Dodd-Frank or PCI compliance here in the United States. Overall, David Albertarazzi of the IT group put it best when he said the massive explosion in data is actually creating an unprecedented manageability issues for banks around the world. And we believe this extends to every organization, whether you're in finance, insurance, or even retail. Managing the explosion of data underlies all these challenges, and as well as the need to modernize and certify those applications in new cloud infrastructures. And so ultimately that brings us to the challenge. The main challenge is the data gap. And so, you have to ask yourself, how are you able to give developers and testers access to the many terabytes or even petabytes of production or production-like data? And so data may be digital, but when data is huge, data has a lot of mass, just like anything else of a physical nature. The same rules apply to digital mass as they do physical mass, such as objects at rest tend to stay at rest. And this is why data is slow. So you think about a few different things. Number one, it takes a slew or an army of people to move data around. You submit a ticket, that has to go on to approval to a manager and so on and so forth, to a sysadmin, a storage admin, a database admin, and finally you get your data days or weeks later. We call this the bucket brigade, where it has to be handed from one person to the next. And then really it's the question to mask or not to mask, because we all know that we should mask, but I would dare say that some people on this webinar know they should mask, but they don't. Why? Because masking is hard. We often have to compromise. Do we mask or get data to our teams on time? Because it's so cumbersome. Sometimes we do the wrong thing and forego it completely. And then ultimately, this never ends, or perhaps it never starts, because this constant need for data is continual. As soon as we get done fulfilling one data request, there's usually 2 or 3 more right behind it for fresh data or mass data to be delivered to a new system or to an existing system that had a destructive test run. Data is the currency of business applications, and these are the taxes essentially that we pay on data. And just like in real life with anything else, when taxes get too high, we just quit transacting altogether. And this is the concept, or this is the challenge of data being slow to move. Pascal, maybe you can talk about the risk.
Right, and the alternative to being slow is clearly not very appealing if you're concerned about security or compliance to standard. So for the sake of time, typical QA engineer will not even bother waiting to get a true copy of the production data and create instead some mock data set as a baseline. Then when it comes to release to production, all bets are off.
Great. So let's talk about how Delphix handles this data and how it addresses this data gap. So Delphix software can be deployed whether it's on-premise or in the Amazon cloud sandboxes, kind of like what Quali has, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. And server virtualization transformed the layer between physical servers and operating systems. Delphix virtualizes the data layer between applications and storage. So you can consider it VMware for application data. And basically Delphix acts as a virtual data provider to the database and application servers. And at a high level, we operate by performing 4 functions. On this first function you see, as you see here, capture all the data. First, we connect to your production sources using standard APIs and perform a one-time compressed copy of the data in your production systems. If you can press next, thank you. Next, we continuously record the changes on your prod systems to the second using those same APIs and without disrupting your system's operations. So now we essentially have a time machine of your databases and apps. We then use block sharing to create virtual copies when you would have otherwise made physical copies. This brings similar agility and cost benefits to data as hypervisors brought to your data center. And ultimately, we can stand up those virtual copy instances as of any point in time, in minutes, and can refresh or rewind those copies after test runs, all via self-service. So essentially, Delphix is a software system that delivers full data sets to your databases and applications in minutes via self-service. This is what we at Delphix refer to as data as a service.
Now let's review in more details the Cloud Sandbox. So Cloud Sandbox defines the environment an application tester will use to validate a specific use case. It includes the physical and virtual infrastructure, application workload, data, test tools, and services. You've probably figured out that in this webinar, we're going to focus on the application data components and how we use the Delphix solution to retrieve that data. Now, what does it take to create a sandbox? A designer or architect will model a blueprint interface and attach automation and orchestration resources. The system includes out-of-the-box networking for layer 1 through 3. Once a blueprint has been created, it can be published to a catalog and deployed to the cloud of your choice. vCenter, OpenStack, Azure, and AWS are all supported out of the box. Another important aspect is the added governance and control for the creation of blueprint to their activation into sandboxes. Finally, blueprint can be activated through a RESTful API or accessed through an end-user self-service portal. Let's now look at the combination of Delphix and Quali solution and how they work together. So as you can see on this diagram, the virtual data can be applied in sandboxes at any stage of the DevOps pipeline, whether it's dev, QA, compliance, staging, and this provides better consistency and confidence that the application will be working as expected once released to production.
So let's take a look at how Delphix will help get your data into the cloud sandboxes at Quali. First, take a look at today in the typical environment without Delphix. Your first step is you back up the production database. So you make your initial copy. Then your next step is you restore the backup and mask it. Then you back up the mask database, and then you transfer that mask copy to the cloud. That might, some cases, sometimes be a physical move of the data, like in the case of Amazon Snowball when the data set is really large. Ultimately, once it gets there, then you restore the mask back up to each non-production environment. It's a very manual-intensive process. So now let's talk about how we move the data with Delphix and why it's different. So for step one, we link the database to Delphix. Then once we link, then we'll configure a masking policy and selective data distribution replication. This is Delphix's way of only replicating masked data into the Quali sandboxes. Then going forward, we're constantly replicating only secure data up to the Quali sandbox. And then we're able to provision non-production environments in minutes and enabling self-service refresh by developers, testers, whoever happens to be using the sandboxes.
So if we look at the overall end-to-end process of certifying an application, it's quite simple. We're talking here about a four-step process. So in the first step, the Delphix engine makes regular copies of the production data, as Adam just mentioned, and applies its secret sauce to sanitize the fields sensitive to privacy, social security number, passwords, etc. In the next step, the end user logs on to the Cloud Shell catalog and deploys the blueprint where the application under test is described for the appropriate stage, for instance, the compliance test. At this point, a sandbox is created and all the application components are deployed in the specific cloud infrastructure, including the database. The built-in orchestration will then create a virtual database in Delphix, then perform a local copy of the VDB on the database, and the sandbox is now ready to be consumed for security testing. Finally, once the application has been certified, the sandbox is terminated, and the VDB that were created are all cleaned up. Now let's review, before we move on to the demo, the different components of the architecture. The Delphix engine is responsible for the data synchronization and scrubbing, as well as managing virtual database copies. The Quali application server sends automation requests to the Cloud Shell execution server that instructs the Delphix engine to create a VDB and to provision this VDB image to the sandbox target database. Now keep in mind that these application components can be used concurrently and scaled to distributed environments. The Delphix engine, as well as the Quali server, can both function in HA mode. Now time for action. Let's review the demo flow. So the demo I will run shows how all this will work through an example of an application release certification for a financial institution. So just to get everyone familiar with some of the concepts you will see in the demo, I'll just quickly go over the flow. So in step one, an end user from the security team logs on to the Cloud Shell self-service portal. Then he selects a blueprint representing the application and the test. And next, it deploys this blueprint that will trigger the creation and configuration of all the application components in the infrastructure, including a copy of the virtual database. At this point, the user will start running his test. Then you will refresh the data to get the latest image from the production instance and restore the data from a previous version. So each time tests are being run against the sandbox. Finally, the test is completed and the user terminates the sandbox. And this step can also be completed through an API or by just letting the sandbox expire. Now let's run the demo. I will first access the Cloud Shell self-service portal. We can see the list of blueprints available to the user. I will now select a blueprint representing a hybrid cloud application that could model a complex financial or healthcare workload with a front end and a back end tier. Let's now look at the details of the database template. We can see that the app will be deployed on vCenter from the SQL Server template. It also has a post-install configuration orchestration that will provision the Delphix VDB from a source database, Quali1, specified as an input. When looking at the advanced option, we have all the details of our deployed application, including access credentials, administrative links, and automation driver. Let's now deploy this blueprint. The orchestration setup will run and deploy all the virtual machines in their respective clouds. The network will also be configured, including VPN, VLANs, and subnets, as well as firewall components. Test tools, such as JMeter, will be deployed and configured. Once the sandbox is active, the user can run performance or security testing against the deployed application. Let's look at the automation commands available from the deployed database. The automation driver exposes multiple capabilities to interact with the data, directly accessible by the end user from the sandbox. We can use a shortcut on the Delphix database to connect directly to the Delphix admin interface. You can see that a new VDB is being created from a sanitized copy of the original data. This VDB is then installed on the target SQL Server host. Once the sandbox is deployed, we can access directly the server console from the database resource and check using SQL Server client that the new database was actually created during setup phase. We'll now create a new VDB called MyDBDTest. This database will be based on the latest snapshot created by the Delphix engine. Once we launch the command from the sandbox, we can check in the Delphix UI that the new VDB is being created. Next, you can run the refresh command and get the latest snapshot from the source. Finally, we can restore the data to a previous known state by just running the corresponding command. We'll now terminate the sandbox. At teardown, the orchestration will delete all the VDBs, clean up the connections, and remove all the VMs in the sandbox. So in this demo, we've seen how the integration of the Delphix data virtualization solution with Quali cloud sandboxes can significantly increase the speed of application deployment without compromising on security. Now that you've seen it in action, we'll spend the next few minutes to do a recap of the key benefits of our approach. So one of the important paradigm of our solution is that enterprise should not pay the price of security when adopting DevOps practices. That means for financial institutions and healthcare or others, the validation and certification of application with their complete data mirroring production.
Great. And as far as increasing agility goes, now that data is weightless, it changes the process and economics of integration, testing, and delivery. Your whole environment is managed and implemented as code, enabling near-instant setup and teardown of entire environments as part of your tool chain.
Another business benefit is the ability to increase efficiency of the data storage by creating data copies dynamically as needed by the tester, decreasing cost as a result. The use of a sandbox model further contributes to this effect by deploying the application and the test and its infrastructure only for a short period of time. These cost savings can be compounded when using this model at scale in a multi-tenant shared environment. Now, before we jump into Q&A, I wanted to review some of the upcoming activities that could further your knowledge around this space. So Quali will host 3 webinars in the next few weeks. On March 22nd, Shashi Kiran, our CMO, will review the top 10 barriers to DevOps and provide some insights on how to overcome them. Then on April 5th, we'll host a webinar on cyber ranges with our partners CipherPass and TSI. And then on April 11th, we'll have a joint webinar with our partner Trace3 to review challenges of continuous testing. Finally, Delphix will host a series of lunch and learn brown bags in the spring. Adam?
Yeah, and we do invite everyone on this webinar to join us for lunch in one of the following cities where it'll be led by myself. We'll have an impassioned discussion about best practices in DevOps as well as sharing real-life stories from our customers that will also be present. We'll be in Chicago March 9th, in Orange County March 15th, Los Angeles March 16th, and Charlotte April 4th. You can go to delphix.com, and in our blog section you'll see we have the most recent dates posted there.
Great. So let's spend the last few minutes on Q&A. I will remind everyone to fill out our latest DevOps survey following the link on the page that you see to be entered in a drawing to win a $100 Amazon gift card. So Adam, do you want to get started with our first question?
Yeah, let's see here. It says, can you tell me if this solution is available on AWS public cloud?
Yes, indeed, we provide this solution on public cloud, such as AWS, as well as on-prem data center. So let me ask the next question. What are some of the largest data sets that customers usually use with Delphix, and what is the performance?
Sure. Well, obviously this one is for me. So we have customers that have some pretty large data sets in Delphix. Some of our largest customers have 60 to 100 terabyte databases inside of Delphix, virtualizing that and delivering virtual copies in their environments. Now, as far as performance goes, all those databases perform at the same level as physical databases as traditional databases, and furthermore, those databases all stand up inside of minutes rather than hours or weeks it takes to normally do that. So they can go from request, and say if you have a 3 terabyte database, it's nothing for our customers to go from request to fully up and operational in under 3 minutes. Great. So let's see here. Okay, so the next question, Pascal, I'll throw this one to you. Do you provide integration with other DevOps pipeline tools?
Yes, we do support Jenkins pipeline and other similar tools such as Bamboo and Travis CI. And the way it works is by triggering a sandbox deployment using our northbound REST API. Okay, so I don't think we have any other questions at this time. Well, thanks everyone for attending and hope you learned something new today. And yes, we'll share with you the recording over the next couple of days.